Hello, my name is Jamie Campbell Naidoo. I'm a professor at the University of Alabama School of Library and Information Studies. I'm also a former school librarian and a former public librarian. At one point in my career, I also worked as a professor here in South Carolina, where you are, at the University of South Carolina. And I'm the former president of the Association for Library Service to Children. Today, we're going to be talking about selecting and using Latinx children's and YA Lit in your library. So specifically, I'm going to go over some topics that hopefully will help you better choose books and serve the Latinx children, teens, and families that are in your community. We're going to start out talking about understanding and reaching Latinx families, identify some of the characteristics of the best Latinx children's and YA books. We'll talk a little bit about selecting Latinx children's and books, YA books, in specific criteria, selection criteria. We'll be exploring some outstanding Latinx children's and YA books. I'll do a lot of book talks, a lot of sharing various titles. And then we'll also talk about how to use some of these materials in your actual library program. And then I have a handout that has even more information about locating books and programming information, etc. Anything that I mentioned today will be available on your handout. I have over 100 recommended books that we'll be talking about today, as well as programming suggestions and online and print resources for finding additional books. So please do consult the handout that goes along with this presentation. So to start out with, let's talk about understanding and reaching Latinx families. So I'm sure many of you already have Latinx families that come into your community, from your community into your library, but what about the families that don't come into your library? Or maybe you've tried to do programming and you can't get them to come, or if they come, they don't return. So let's think about some of the needs of Latinx families, learn a little bit more about Latinx families, and then we'll delve into the children's literature. So I'm gonna actually turn my video off because you really need to see what's on the screen and not me. So understanding and reaching Latinx families. First of all, I like to start out with, before we talk about anything, is a quote from Maya Cristina Gonzalez. She is a Latinx, actually Chicana, children's book creator. She mentions in this quote that when she was a child, she never had an opportunity to see herself represented in the books that she encountered in the library, or even just the books that she found, in classrooms or in her world. And so she often, as a child, would go and turn to the back pages of those books and draw her round Chicana face with her long dark hair so that she could see herself represented in the pages of those books. Fortunately for her and for us, as she grew up, she became a children's book creator so that she now provides images for many Latinx kids to see and have the opportunity to see themselves represented and reflected in the pages of the books that she creates. I'm sure most all of you have heard about the metaphor of books being used as mirrors or windows or a sliding glass door. And Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop is the person who first kind of coined the phrase of books being used as mirrors, windows, or doors. And the idea behind that is that a book offers an opportunity for a child from a culture, in this case, a Latinx culture, if they encounter a book with Latinx characters, it might provide an opportunity for them to see themselves reflected. So a mirror, kind of like what Maya was talking about in the previous quote. But for someone outside the Latinx culture, the books could serve as a window into seeing and learning more about that particular culture. Or what we really would like to have is opportunities for sliding glass door experiences. Now, sliding glass door experiences are those experiences where we encourage children outside of culture to not just peer into the stories and lives about people from other cultures, but to really engage and experience and have opportunities to think about what would it be like to be someone from that culture and to really learn more about that culture. Grant Snyder in this image here goes even further. He talks about there are many other ways that you can think of as books, as stepping stones for conversations, as anchors to anchor yourself in your own world when things might seem to be swirling around you, as springboards for conversations, as flying carpets to other worlds, so many different things that you can think of as books. Books as being and things that they provide for children and for teens. And so with this in mind, we want to find the best books that we can use with children and teens, the best books that represent Latinx families. And we also want to make sure that the Latinx families that we serve have some of these opportunities to see themselves connected and represented in these literature. So let's talk a little bit about Latinx kids before we talk about serving Latino families. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of Latinx kids books out there. I mean, over time, if you look collectively at the body, there's a lot of books that have been published. But still, if you look at the larger world of children's literature, there's still a disproportionate number of books about other cultures, particularly animals or maybe perhaps white culture that's being represented, and not enough books about Latinx culture. From the books that have historically been printed and published over time, there have been cultural stereotypes about Latinx populations, either inaccuracies about the culture, omissions where things are just completely left out about Latin American history or Latinx history or culture. And there's been lots of stereotypes. And we'll talk a little bit later about what some of those stereotypes have looked like. Research has shown that negative images about their culture can make Latinx kids feel bad about themselves, bad about their culture, kind of feel unworthy. And it prompts those from outside the Latinx culture, so non-Latinx youth, as well as educators, to construct biases and to form misunderstandings about the Latinx culture. Because think about it, if you know nothing about a particular culture and you're learning about that culture from a book, you're just taking everything that's being introduced to you at face value. And we're hoping that that information is correct and accurate. If it's not, then you're taking that inaccurate information and you're just assuming it's correct. The last bullet here just talks about in the most recent statistics from the Cooperative Children's Book Center, which were published in 2020, that suggests that of all the books that were published in 2019, just 5.3% of those books represented Latinx cultures. And you can see kind of how this what played out in 2018 from this infographic here. So just a year before, that was also just barely 5% in 2018. So 5.3% in 2019, 5% in 2018 of all the books that were published. And so you can see from the infographic there, if you want to provide some of those mirror experiences, the Latinx kids don't have very big mirrors to see representations and reflections of their cultures. So there's nothing you can do other than purchase the books to increase the number of books that are being published. But you can find the best books that are out there. And so that's what we really want to talk about today is finding the best books and helping connect those with Latinx families. So when we think about reaching Latinx families and audiences, what are some things to think about? Well, first of all, the Latinx culture is very diverse. It's a label that we've stuck on a very diverse population. And the people that are in this group come from many different cultural backgrounds. So they might come from Mexico or Cuba or Puerto Rico or South America or Central America. In some families, the Latinx parents want their kids to only speak English because they think that is the way for them to succeed in the world. In other Latinx families, the parents or caregivers want their kids to learn and speak Spanish so they can help maintain connections to their home cultures and to their cultural roots. Some Latinx kids don't read or speak Spanish at all. So it's important to just keep that in mind whenever you're selecting books, that the Latinx population is very diverse. So you want to have a lot of different cultures represented, subcultures of the larger Latinx culture. But then you also want to have books in a variety of languages, English and in Spanish, books that might sprinkle in Spanish in with the English text. But just, realizing that, you might have families in your community that might not meet what you perceive as them being. You might perceive them as being Spanish speakers and they may not be. You might perceive that they're from Mexico, but they might not be. So it's important to know your community and who's in your community. And I put know your community, highlight that here because too often I have worked with librarians and I've heard them say, well, I've tried doing outreach to Latino families and it didn't work. And I created this program and it didn't work. Or I created it and they came, but they weren't as excited as I thought they were going to be. And it turns out if you really talk to those librarians, the families that they were trying to reach out to, they just assumed those families were Mexican. So they were planning these programs that celebrated Mexican culture, which is great and wonderful, but that provided opportunities for those Latinx individuals and their community to have window experiences, because the Latinx people in their communities weren't from Mexico. They might have been from, let's say, Guatemala. And so while there might be some aspects of Guatemalan culture that are similar to Mexican culture, they're not exactly the same thing. Um, and so, it's important, if you want to provide opportunities for mirror experiences for Latinx families, kids, and teens to connect, that you provide opportunities for books that reflect their specific cultural experiences. Also, keep in mind that some Latinx families may never set foot in the library. And so it's important to think outside your library walls and to do outreach out into the community, oftentimes working with community partners. A few other things to think about is some Latinx families identify as American, some identify as Latinx, and then some identify as like within their own specific cultural group. So like Cuban American or Mexican American, or Guatemalan American, etc., Brazilian American. Many Latinx people oftentimes live in two worlds where they're kind of bridging a divide between their larger US culture and their home culture. And sometimes the cultural values at home don't always mesh with the larger US cultural values. Just one word of note here. While I use the term Latinx, some individuals within this cultural group reject the term Latinx, they reject the term Latino, and some reject the term Hispanic. So it really just depends on individuals from that cultural group that you're talking to. So I always encourage librarians to with the populations that they're working with, find out what labels do they want to be called, what terms do they want to be used to describe them. Some of you may ask why Latinx. So the term Latinx is used instead of Latino because Latino is masculine in the Spanish language, and Latina is feminine. So oftentimes we used to say Latino, Latina, but then the term was changed to Latinx to represent really an understanding that there are many different genders besides male and female. So Latinx is a little bit more, encompasses just a little bit more of that. So one other thing to think about whenever you are trying to reach out to Latinx families is the importance of providing materials with cultural content that makes connections to your families, to their own cultural traditions, and then emphasizes general Latino cultural values, such as a strong sense of family. And particularly if you're trying to reach teens or youth and kids, you want to have something that books that really connect to their contemporary experiences. So not just historical books, but current books as well that connect to their contemporary experiences, perhaps of being bicultural, bilingual, and just kind of, just daily experiences. So if we're thinking about how to identify the characteristics of the best Latinx kids and YA books, what are some things to think about? Well, first, the best Latinx books for youth, and here I use the term youth to mean kids and teens. The best books will highlight stories of daily experiences. So stories that kids can connect to, that they can relate to. Stories about celebrating family and cultural origins, stories about making friendships, about school life, about relationships, maybe about dating, about friendship, so that type of thing that kids can relate to. Those are things that happen, in their everyday life. Maybe you should also include some stories about understanding immigration and borderland experiences, because that is very real in the lives of some Latinx youth and their families. It can also provide an opportunity for non-Latinx youth to better understand borderland experiences, perhaps of their Latinx peers. Something else to have, the best Latinx books will explore bicultural experiences, and they will also feature intersectionality. By intersectionality, I mean by Latinx characters that also might have a disability, that have diverse gender identities, that have diverse sexual orientations. And so some of the books here that I've got on your screen actually represent Latinx books that have characters or that themselves, or characters that have siblings that are bicultural, and then also might have a disability. So you might want to check those out. They're on your handout. So whenever you also other things to think about when you're selecting the best books, avoid really tired aspects of Latino culture that have been used over and over again, and oftentimes as stereotypes. Things like sombreros, siestas, tacos. Those have been used for a long time, and sometimes when we use those, we're actually just perpetuating stereotypes and misunderstandings about a particular cultural group. I give some recommendations of other things that are specific to certain subsets of the Latinx culture that you might consider. So things like loteria games or lowriders, or maybe something like quinceaneras, or kids having multiple surnames, and and how to navigate having multiple surnames that they and their families embrace, but they maybe the larger U.S. culture doesn't embrace, or education systems don't embrace. Songs about cookie frogs or capoeira or other sports within particular culture, particular Latinx countries. Books about specific cultural experiences or events that are related to like a subset of Latinx culture. So events that might be resonate specifically, cultural events might resonate specifically with kids that are from Cuba, or kids that are from Puerto Rico, or kids that are from Mexico. But here I also caution to avoid othering when sharing and promoting these books. Oftentimes when we try to promote books about other cultures, sometimes we create an us versus them idea, as instead of creating an opportunity for kids to see and understand that those that are different from them are the same, but just a little bit different. So they're the same but different. So you want to provide opportunities where kids are making connections, cross-cultural connections with kids from other cultural groups, and not like, oh, these are books about those types of people. I really can't understand that because I just don't relate to that. Other ideas of the best books, books that connect with music. Music is very powerful. So books that you might consider books that have popular Latinx songs by Latinx artists, or books that have children's rhymes from Latin America. Things like that that will tap into different musical interests of your diverse patrons. Books that highlight the achievements of the Latinx individuals throughout history are also important. So books so biographies, contemporary biographies, but then also historic biographies as well, but making sure to represent the diversity of the Latinx culture. So books representing individuals throughout Mexico, Central America, South America, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and then also here in the US as well. So lots of different types of opportunities to explore the lives of famous Latinx individuals. The best books are also created by someone who has extreme knowledge about that cultural group. So someone who has insider knowledge or has had vast cultural experiences, and they know to know all the nuances of what it's like to live within a particular cultural group, and the specific characteristics of being, let's say, Mexican American. So I mentioned on your handout, we have a lot of recommendations of where you can go to find some best books. But one of the first places you might want to look is identifying award-winning Latinx youth literature. So here I mentioned 3 different awards that are given to Latinx youth literature. The Americas Award, it includes books in English and Spanish. It includes children's and YA books in fiction and nonfiction. And those books are books that depict experiences of people that live in Latin America, the Caribbean, and of Latinx individuals here in the United States. The Pura Bel Prey Award is given by the American Library Association. And when it was first created, it was an award given just to children's literature. But this year, in January 2021, the first Pura Bel Prey Award was given to a young adult book, celebrating books that were published in 2020. So the young adult category was added in 2020. So now these are books that are celebrate the Latinx cultural experience, but they're written by someone from within the Latinx culture. From books that win the Americas Award, the persons don't necessarily have to be Latinx themselves, the creators, but for the Pura Bel Prey Award, they do have to be have a Latinx cultural background. The Tomas Rivera Mexican American Children's Book Award celebrates books that are about Mexican American heritage and Mexican American culture. And all of these awards are awarded to books that were published the previous year. So for instance, the 2021 awards are for books that were published in 2020. So you can find links to these on your handout, as well as some resources that go along with using these books. The Americas Award, for instance, has a lot of great resources available for programming, thinking about how to use it in your curriculum. So that gives an opportunity, if you're a public librarian, to connect with school librarians or teachers and giving them, recommendations of how to use some Latinx kids books in their curriculum. All right, so selecting Latinx kids books. So I've talked about what are the best books. Well, let's think of some other selection criteria, things that might help us maybe look at books that are currently in our collection and evaluate them. Because I always think it's useful to have evaluation criteria. So this evaluation criteria is things that I've developed over time through my own research and understanding of Latinx books, as well as research about Latinx children's literature. So here's some things to think about when you're evaluating Latinx children's and YA books. First of all, think about the illustrations and the text in the books that you have. Do they depict the diverse Latinx experience? You've heard me say it over and over again, but this population is very diverse. So holistically, we want your books to represent some of this diversity. You're probably not going to find one book that represents all these cultures, but you can find collectively over your books together that lots of different types of ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, abilities, genders, sexual orientations, etc., ages are represented. So second thing to think about. How are Latinx characters portrayed in your books? Are they portrayed as someone who is exotic, that lives in this, foreign land that your kids cannot connect with? Or do they have everyday life experiences that your kids can connect to, kids that are Latinx and kids that are not Latinx? Do extended families of Latinx youth appear in stories and illustrations? The importance of family is very large within the Latinx community. And so it's important for that to appear, in books that are about Latinx culture, about teens, and kids that are from Latinx, various Latinx cultural backgrounds. They should have opportunities to read stories where kids maybe have an aunt or an uncle or grandma or grandpa, that's around and that they're connecting with beyond just their parents. Because and within the lives of Latinx kids, there is a larger family that is there. So that should be represented in the literature. Also, think in terms of representation, are pejorative words such as illegal and wetback avoided? Whenever you're talking about immigrants that are may not be documented in the United States, you should use the word undocumented. And so books should use that word, undocumented. They should not use the word illegal or any other words, pejorative words to indicate that the individuals are not U.S. citizens and they have not gone through traditional methods of becoming an immigrant to the United States. Some other things to think about if you're evaluating kids and YA books with Latinx characters. Do the text and illustrations portray Latinx characters as self-sufficient, people that embrace their own culture, or do they have to give up portions of their cultural heritage to succeed in the United States? And then think about, again, who's represented. Are all the Latinx characters or most of the Latinx characters in the books that you have in your library, are they portrayed as immigrants? Are they portrayed as undocumented? Because as we've talked about, they're Latinx individuals come from all walks of life. So that diversity, socioeconomic diversity, should be represented. And generational differences should be represented in the books that you have in your library. Are additional features present in books, such as pronunciation guides to perhaps Spanish words, or author's notes to further give information about cultural elements that are in the books? If Spanish is present in the text, is it used naturally, or does it seem forced? Does it seem like the authors just inserted Spanish in the text to make it seem more authentic, but it really reads kind of clunky? Do the illustrations and text indicate that the author and illustrator have some type of understanding of the Latinx culture? Because as we've already said, you want them to be someone who has knowledge or is from that cultural background, so to keep from perpetuating stereotypes. And then also think about is, will this book add anything new to your collection about Latinx cultures, which is something we're always asking ourselves whenever we're doing any type of collection development. Will this book add anything new to our collection? So I want to stop here, and I want us to think a little bit about some books to avoid. I'm going to give you lots of books that I recommend, but what are some books to avoid? Skippy John Jones is one of the first books that I wanted to talk about. Now, as I say, Skippy John Jones, some of you are probably thinking, oh, but I love Skippy John Jones. I love having him in my story time. My kids like reading Skippy John Jones. Don't tell me I can't use Skippy John Jones. So I am not the only person saying this. You can find lots of information online for people that are from the Latinx culture that talk about how horrible Skippy John Jones is, how Skippy John Jones perpetuates racism about Mexican culture, and also how it makes fun of the Spanish language. Here I highlight an article for De Colores, the Raza Experience in Children's Books. And this is a great blog where they do a lot of essays as well as reviews of Latinx Kids Lit. Strongly encourage you to check it out if you haven't checked it out, to find reviews of the newest books, but then also to see some more deeper conversations about some of the books. So here, there's a great article talking about Skippy John Jones and how it just basically perpetuates racism about Mexican culture, the racism that about Mexicans and Mexican Americans that has been in the U.S. culture for a very long time. And the article on the right is from a parent, basically, who talks about they don't appreciate the mock Spanish in Skippy John Jones, and that how appalled they were when they came across the Skippy John Jones books with their kids. And they said, talking about how problematic it is. So if for some reason you decide to use these books, which I do not recommend, but if you decide to use these, I strongly encourage you to think about what messages these books are sending to your kids. And if you are using them, then have a conversation with them about, is it okay to make fun of the way someone speaks? Is it okay to make fun of someone's culture? If you just use these books without having a conversation with kids, then you might just be perpetuating racism, making kids that speak Spanish feel bad about themselves, making kids from Mexican American backgrounds feel embarrassed by their culture and the way their culture is being portrayed. Something else to think about, and I know now some other people are going to be like, oh no, and here comes another book I can't use. Ghosts by Rena Tegelmeier. Now, I understand that you may love Rena Tegelmeier. She has some great graphic novels out there, some great graphic novels about the LGBTQ experience, that just some great graphic novels for tweens that kids can really connect to. Great, you can love her books. But Ghosts is not one of those books that is without problems. So here I've given links to 3 different blogs. There's a lot more out there, but 3 different blogs that talk about some of the problems with Ghosts. The major problem of Ghosts is that there's the cultural appropriation and use of the Day of the Dead within the book, and it is just kind of forced upon the story, into the story, the use of the Day of the Dead culture. The name of the town is basically making fun of individuals that celebrate the Day of the Dead. The use of just how the characters interact with the topic of the Day of the Dead just seems very forced and very hokey. And there's been a lot of conversations between librarians, children's book scholars, and with the author of the book about why she created that part of the story and why she added in the Day of the Dead element to the story. And so you can find out some of the conversations there. But a lot of the conversations basically, talk about the fact that Tegelmeier is not from the Mexican American culture that she's trying to represent. She makes some wrong assumptions about the way the Day of the Dead is celebrated. And the naming that she used for some of the characters or for the name of the town isn't very culturally sensitive. And so just, there's some pause there for, if you do use these books with tweens, to have a conversation with them about cultural appropriation, have a conversation about, well, what message might this book be sending to kids? So I encourage you to go and check out some of those resources. This is a book, an older book. You probably don't even have it in your collection anymore, but if you do, find it, think about it, read it, think about what I have to say about this. So Maria Molina and the Day of the Dead. This is a picture book by Kathleen Kroll, illustrated by Enrique Sanchez. It's a book from the 90s. In this book, Maria and her family live in the United States, but they're going to be going to the US. They're going to be immigrating to the US. In the story, though, once she's in Mexico, Maria's baby brother dies. But when she hears that she's going to the United States, she's so excited about going to the United States, she kind of forgets about her baby brother. She forgets about celebrating Day of the Dead there. And she's all super excited about going trick-or-treating and celebrating Halloween, where she gets lots of money to buy candy and fancy costumes. So there is nothing wrong with having a story about a kid who leaves Mexico and immigrates to the United States. But it should not be a story where the child is giving up elements of her cultural heritage to be successful, or to, when she goes into the new country. It should not be a story about a kid who forgets that she has a deceased baby brother and is much more excited about, getting candy. So read the book and think about what messages it's sending to immigrant families. And is it suggesting that they have to give up elements of their culture, or that they should forget elements of their culture and wholeheartedly embrace every element of US culture? So encourage you to check that out. One other book that I wanted to call your attention, and then we're going to move on to some of the great books that are out there. This book is called Welcome to My Neighborhood. So this book came out in 2010, so it's about 11 years old now. It's a book about these two kids, and they're looking around their neighborhood, and it's an ABC book, and they're identifying different things. Now, in theory, this is a great idea. We can have an ABC book that identifies elements in a kid's neighborhood and cultural elements around them. But this book, unfortunately, fails at that. So A is for abuela, so grandmother, great. But A is also for abandoned car. B is for bottles that are smashed like falling stars. Broken bottles of black cherry sodas bought at a barrio bodega. And then Q is for quemar, which is the burn houses to the ground. So throughout this ABC book, there are some positive elements of this neighborhood, but there are some very negative and very odd choices of things to have in the alphabet as we're identifying elements of the neighborhood. And while I'm not a proponent of putting on your rose-colored glasses and thinking everything in life is beautiful and without problems, I think, celebrating or talking about abandoned cars and talking about broken bottles might create a very negative view of this particular neighborhood. And if kids are only introduced to this story about a barrio, about a Latinx, a Chicano neighborhood, then they may, develop misunderstanding of what it's like to live in this community. On the right here, I have an article that I wrote in a blog post, which you'll have to use the Wayback Machine now to find it if you wanted to, or you can just read it here, where I give tell you why I don't recommend this book. Basically, I say, that when I wrote this, my review, it had happened in Tuscaloosa, had just had a tornado come through. And so there was lots of damage in Tuscaloosa, lots of trees uprooted, houses were, crumbled to the ground, buildings had crumbled to the ground. And so when I was reading and reviewing this book, I was thinking about, if I wanted to describe my community right now, I'm going to try to focus on the positive things. I might mention a few of the difficulties that are around, but overall, I want to focus on the better things in my neighborhood to kind of help me make it through this hard time. And that's what I think, in kids' books, it's fine to have some things that highlight some of the not so pretty things in life, but in all, I think the good should outweigh the bad, and you should leave with a multi-dimensional view of a topic, but not an overwhelmingly negative view of a topic. So if you do have this book, check it out, read it, and think about it. And think about what message it might send to kids that are interacting with it. All right. So now let's move on to talking about some outstanding books, some outstanding children's and YA books. All right, so the first book I want to share with you, or topic I want to talk about, is paletas, or popsicles. So a new book, Paletero Man by Lucky Diaz, illustrated by Micah Player, is coming out. And it's all about the popsicle man and how this child wants a popsicle. He follows Popsicle Man around. Unfortunately, he runs out of money because he had a hole in his pocket and he loses the change he had to buy the popsicle. So when he catches up with the Popsicle Man, he doesn't have any money. But fortunately for him, the Popsicle Man gives him and everyone in the community a popsicle. And so that kind of just changes his day. Lucky Diaz has a great music video that goes along with it. So there's opportunity there for singing. So I'll give a link to this. It's also in your handouts with words to the song, to the Paletero Man. A book that you could add to that could be What Can You Do with Paleta? So this is a book written by Carmen Tafoya, illustrated by the sister of Judy Morales. So her name is Magali Morales. And this is about all the great, wonderful things that you can do in your neighborhood with a popsicle or a paleta. And so you're following these two kids around as they're going around the neighborhood, identifying things in the neighborhood, and then talking about all the different fun things that they can do with a popsicle. So it's a great book to partner or pair with Paletero Man. Another book that you might consider if you want to do something with paletas is Ugly Cat and Pablo. So now this is not a picture book, but if you want to do an intergenerational program or you've done something with paletas and you wanted to snag some of the beginning readers, this is an early reader book called Ugly Cat and Pablo. And it does about a cat who likes paletas and his sidekick Mouse. And so it's written by Isabel Quintero, who's written a couple YA books. So it's a cute, funny book, first in a series. So I encourage you to go and check that out. Concepts. You can introduce concepts throughout your storytime programming that you do. And you can use Latinx books to do that, to introduce various concepts. One book here is Round as a Tortilla. This is the first of several books that's created by Roseanne Greenfield Thong and illustrated by John Parra. And this particular one is a book about shapes. So it's looking at the idea of a tortilla, and the tortilla is round. And so it's a book about shapes. They also have a book about colors, as well as some other books. Vamos, Let's Go Eat by Raul III is, you can see here, it's a Poor Bell Prey award-winning book, but it's a concept book about food. And so the main characters are going to a food truck, and then going through the food truck, they're learning about different types of food. How to Vote a Taco is a bilingual book that is about directions. So left, right, up, down. So it's a book, you can see here, it's got some lucha libre wrestlers in it, it's got dragons in it, it's got magicians in it, but it teaches how, directions. If Dominican Were a Color is an opportunity to explore Dominican culture, but then also to think about the many different ways that Dominican people look. And thinking about the color of skin, but also the beauty of being diverse and of being Dominican. Thinking about beauty, maybe something beautiful, how art transformed a neighborhood, is a book about a girl. Her name is Mira, which means look in Spanish. Mira lives in a neighborhood that is gray, that is dull, that is boring, until one day she meets a muralist. And he teaches her how to look for art and how to find beauty and color in the neighborhood around her. The community gets together, they create a mural, which changes this gray, dull environment into a very vibrant community. The story is awesome. The illustrations are beautiful. And what I really appreciate about the book is at the back of the book, there is a informational note from the author that talks about and honors Rafael Lopez as a muralist and talks about the murals that Rafael Lopez creates and how he does community murals. And so you can go and find out more about him. I suggest pairing this book with a book that you might already have in your collection, an older book called Murals, Walls That Sing by George Ancona, which is a photographic essay nonfiction, which follows the child and they look at various murals that are in their Latinx neighborhood. And then a newer book is called Hey Wall, A Story of Art and Community, which is also about murals, also about communities getting together to create beautiful art that changes their neighborhood. And you can see it's written by Susan Verde and illustrated by John Parra. So the topic of muralist, though, is not something that's just that you do in story time. It could also be something that you have a conversation with teens. So the book Shadow Saver by Daniel Jose Older. This is a first book in the series. It's about a teen who is a muralist, But her murals are not just regular murals. Her murals come to life. And throughout this book, she has to fight demons that are trying to take over her community. And so the book is all about girl power, about believing in yourself, believing in your cultural heritage. There's a cameo by a really great kick butt Latinx librarian. There's a lot of awesome stuff that's going on in this book. And if you do something with this book, a book discussion or program with this book, it gives you opportunity to explore either other fantasy books written by Latinx book creators, or also to look at tagging, to look at murals, having kids, maybe teens, create their own mock-up for a mural, or even do their own mural in your library or in your community. Lucha Libre wrestling. This is another great topic that you can explore through programming, through displays, through book discussions, through intergenerational programming. So here I give some recommendations for some Lucha Libre books. Nino Wrestles the World by Gigi Morales. There's a sequel to this book as well. It's about a little boy who it's supposed to be time for bed, but he doesn't want to go to bed. He really wants to play with his Lucha Libre wrestling figures instead and pretend like he is a Lucha Libre wrestler. Now, Lucha Libre, that is Mexican wrestling. And you can see an image below of two kids that have their masks on as they celebrate wrestling and read Nino Wrestles the World. If you do some type of program with this, you can have opportunities to have kids create their own Lucha Libre masks, to think about what wrestling hero they might want to be. There are digital apps out there where kids can take a photo of themselves and turn themselves into a Lucha Libre character or wrestler. But don't think that wrestling is just something for boys. Lucia the Luchador, which also has a sequel. There's a sequel to it that came out in 2020. Lucia the Luchadora is about a girl who is all obsessed with Lucha Libre wrestling. And so it provides another opportunity for exploring Lucha Libre wrestling in your library. Maximilian and the Mystery of the Guardian Angel. It's a bilingual Lucha Libre thriller. Basically, it's a flip book. One part of the book is all in English, and you flip it, and the other part of the book is all in Spanish. So you get the two for one special there if you buy this book. It's written and illustrated by Javier Garza. It is a book about a kid who Max, who is obsessed with Lucha Libre wrestling. He has one wrestler that he really, really likes, a wrestler that is really fly, that he thinks is just awesome. And it turns out that wrestler is actually a long lost relative. As it says in the title, there's a mystery there that has to be solved. The first in a series. Javier Garza creates a lot of books that have appeal to readers that might be interested in wrestling or comic art. He's also created a picture book called Lucha Libre, The Man in the Silver Mask. It's actually created before Maximilian. And so it's just a picture book about Lucha Libre wrestling. For slightly older readers or readers that are beginning to read on their own or learning how to read, a brand new easy reader series is coming out. The series is called El Toro and Friends. This tag team is the first book. In this easy reader series, it's about luchadors, and it's created by Raul III. So I encourage you to check that out. It's coming out in 2021. So I mentioned the music and how music can be a great thing to celebrate, gives you an opportunity to celebrate contemporary and older artists that may be from the Latinx culture. So here are some examples of some books that you can consider. Drum Dream Girl is a picture book biography created by Margarita Engel, illustrated by Rafael Lopez. It's about a girl who wants to be a drummer, but unfortunately in Cuba, girls during her time were not supposed to be drummers. And so it's a book about breaking gender stereotypes, following your dreams, and proving to yourself and to the world that you can become an awesome dreamer and an awesome musician. Tito Puente, Mambo King. This is just an example of picture book biography created by Monica Brown. She has created a lot of great picture book biographies. She's created one on Celia Cruz. This particular one is celebrating the Tito Puente. I love just the movement in the illustrations and the bright colors. So like you can just see on the cover of the book, this guy has 4 hands. He didn't really have 4 hands, but he's jumping so fast it looks like he has 4 hands. So I just love the movement in the illustrations here. A Girl Named Rosita is a new book that has come out about the life of Rita Morena. She was an actor, she was a singer, she was a trailblazer, and a dancer. And so it follows her life as a child all the way up to, and then follows in things that she did when she became an adult. Be Bold, Be Brave is about 11 Latinas who made US history. So you might find singers, you might find astronauts. There's a nod in there to Pura Belpré. So it's just, it includes a lot of introducing kids to famous Latinas from throughout U.S. history. And there's a few other books about that on that topic that I'm going to mention today as well. Selena, the Queen of Piano music, is about not the current music name artist name Selena, but the older Selena, and her music and how it really was cutting edge for her time. And so there's a couple other books about Selena as well. You can actually see a nod to her over here in Be Bold and Be Brave as well. Little Libros, here's Selena again, as well as some other, as Pile. Little Libros is a great informational board book series. So Little Libros creates board books that explore Latin American countries. They explore famous individuals throughout Latin American culture, and also elements of Latinx culture. So like Lotteria or Lucha Libre. The books, these little board books they're beautiful, they're sturdy, they have just the right amount of content for little kids. Lots of things to talk about in the conversation and have conversations with. So here are just some examples. I put the URL to Little Libros in your handout for you to go check out more about Little Libros. Again, there's a lot of great biographies, exploring other countries and just various topics about Latinx culture. So encourage you to check out Little Libros. If you're looking for some recommendations of historical fiction or informational books that explore education equality within Latinx culture historically, then here are some books to think about. So Separate is Never Equal is about Sylvia Mendez and her family's fight for desegregation. It's about the court case that preceded Brown versus Board of Education, took place in California. And it's about basically Sylvia's family trying to fight for equal rights for her to have the same education and the Mexican kids to have the same education as white kids. Sylvia and Aki is a novel, an elementary novel about Sylvia Mendez again, but then Aki is a child that who is Japanese American, and she is sent off to the Japanese internment camps. And so it's, it's around the same time as the Mendez versus Westminster case. But in this case, you have Sylvia's family going to live in the house of Aki as their families, Sylvia's family is watching over Aki's house as that family has gone away to be in an internment camp. So it gives an opportunity to talk about some lesser known elements of US history, to talk about equality, and to talk about unfairness too, and help kids understand that through the point of view of a kid, well, when adults do things that are unfair, and how do you navigate that? All Equal is a ballad of the Lemon Grove incident. It's also a story about the desegregation, first successful desegregation case in California, set during the 1930s. So I encourage you to check that out. My Year in the Middle is by Lila Quintero Weaver. And so this is a little bit different look on education equality. So it's about, Lila grew up in Alabama. She grew up in Alabama during the time of desegregation. She is from South America. And so she grew up as a South American, implanted into the US South, and in a time with lots of tension between blacks and whites. And so the book is all about her experience being in the middle. She wasn't quite white, she wasn't quite black. And so her experience of a year during in school in integration, and a girl finding her voice and taking a stand what is right, taking a stand for equality in education. Some other Latin American or Latinx nonfiction. So this book, The Sea Ringed World, Sacred Stories of the Americas, is a new book of 2021. It is a translation. It's a book from Mexico. It's written by an award-winning author. It's illustrated by a famed famed illustrator, a creator, and is translated by a notable U.S. author. So it's got a lot of great book creators there. It is a story about several stories of indigenous people throughout Central America and Latin America and North and South America. So it's indigenous voices, people talking about elements of their culture. It's a very beautiful book. Latinitas, celebrating 40 Dreamers, is celebrating, it's a biography collection of 40 famous Latinas throughout Latin America. And so you have an opportunity to have little vignettes, little introductions to 40 different people. And kids then can have an opportunity then to go and explore individual people that are represented there in other books that are about them. So it's a great overview of some famous individuals in Latin American history. Ada's Violin is about the recycled orchestra of Paraguay. It's about kids that are living in a garbage dump, and they take that garbage and they turn it into musical instruments, and they become an international sensation. So it's based on a true story. There's a video that goes along with it. It is a great opportunity for kids to learn about how you can take what might seem like an inopportunity and turn it into an opportunity, and how you can kind of change your environment and be the change that you want to see in your community. My Family Divided is written by Diane Guerrero, and she is a actress that was on Orange is the New Black. So this is a memoir about her family's immigration experience. And so it's a great book for tweens, and for kids that might be interested in the life of this actress. And so you might be a way to snag in someone to learn more about that topic just because of their interest in her. Who was the voice of the people, Cesar Chavez? So the Who is HQ, the Who HQ, so the Who headquarters. You know, they created Who Is, Who Was series. Well, now all those books from the Who Is, Who Was series are now being reimagined into graphic novels. So this one comes out later in 2021. So this is Who Was the Voice of Cesar Chavez? So it's the story of Cesar Chavez and the great work that he did for rights of Mexicans in the United States, but it's in graphic novel format. So it's a great way to connect with visual learners. Yes, We Are Latinos. This is a book created by Alma Florada and Isabel Campoy, illustrated by David Diaz. And it really has a great opportunity through poems to look at the diversity within the Latinx culture and look at the many different ways that someone can be Latino and the many different cultural backgrounds that you can come from. So it's a great way to kind of explore would be a great book to pair with Latinitas to really kind of explore the diversity within the Latinx culture. Rafi and Rosie, Pirates. So this is you can see it's an early reader book. It's about these two coquille frogs that are in San Juan, Puerto Rico. But through the story, kids are learning about the history of San Juan. They're learning about the fortress in San Juan. They're just learning about other elements of the city of San Juan in Puerto Rico. So it's a way for younger kids to learn a little bit about history of that city through a story about two coquille frogs. And then you can kind of connect that to the fact that, you know, coquille frogs are indigenous to Puerto Rico, and they're all throughout Puerto Rico. So there's other books about coquille frogs that you could compare with that. Books about border crossing. So there's lots of books out there. These are just a selection of books. I'm sure you already know about the book Dreamers by Juji Morales, which talks about her. It's loosely based upon her experience coming to the United States and wanting a better world for her and for her child. I say loosely based because her child was actually, was born here in the United States. In the book, the child was born in Mexico. But what's really great about this book is that it really captures the experience of people that are dreamers and captures the experience of someone that doesn't understand a language trying to figure out and navigate a new world. There's a lot of great things in illustrations that really give an opportunity to connect with what it feels like to learn a new language or to hear someone speak a language you don't understand. Other suggestions of border crossing books. So They Call Me Guerrero is a book by David Bowles. We'll talk about him multiple times today. He has these are a collection of poems about kids that are at the border. And speaking of books about kids at the border, Niños, Poems for the Lost Children of Chile is a book that comes out in 2021. It's also a translated book, and it is a book that profiles several different children that came from Chile and immigrated, on foot to immigrate into the United States. So you can kind of see some, profile of all the different kids and where they came from and why they set out to immigrate. We Are Clouds is also another book about children immigrating. It's a book that comes from us from Canada, from Groundwood Books. It's created by Jorge Argueta. We Are Not From Here is another book about border crossing. This is a YA book, and it's a book that kind of gives you a first person point of view perspective of kids that are on the border and why they're immigrating. But then also another border crossing story, Between Us and Abuela. So this is a story about a child, these two children and their abuela who lives across the border. So it's a border crossing story, but it's not a tragic border crossing story. So to kind of give, an additional perspective on the border crossing stories, there are a lot of tragic stories, but then there are also some very positive stories as well. And so this is about this family that's connecting with each other across the border. I've mentioned several biographies today. Some really great biographies that would really appeal to kids that like graphic novels or like cartoons or comic strips are this series is created here. This is a series that comes from Argentina. It's the Anti-Princess series and the Anti-Hero series. So it's a series of books about famous women and famous men throughout Latin American culture. And the great accomplishments that they made. Some of these books are translated into English. Some of them are only in Spanish. This links to the publisher's website. You can also find them on Amazon as well, and probably through your book distributor. Thinking about other types of Latinx books, why not explore Latinx folktales with graphic novels? So here I give examples and suggestions of 3 different graphic novels that you can use to explore Latinx folktales. So The Dragon Slayer is created by Jaime Hernandez, and it is a book that looks at several different Latin American folktales and it's a retelling of those. Lowriders to the Center of the Earth follows our friends from Lowriders in Space as they go to the center of the Earth to rescue their kitty. And while there, they encounter La Llorona, they encounter Chupacabra, they encounter several different characters from Latinx folktales. So it has lots of appeal to kids that are artists that like to draw, but then is an opportunity to kind of explore Latinx culture as well. Tales of the Feathered Serpent. This is a graphic novel, first of a graphic novel series that is created by Cinco Puntos Press, and it is following tales about indigenous cultures, and it would appeal to kids that like Percy Jackson, and it would pair really great with Dragon Slayer. So here I give a link to Toon Books, which has a lot of ways that you can do programming with Dragon Slayer, how you can tie it to Common Core standards. So if you're working with teachers or school librarians that need to tie books to Common Core, there's some recommendations on how to do that. And Toon Books has a lot of great things on their website. Other recommendations of traditional tales or variants of traditional tales. These are all picture book recommendations. So Frederico and the Wolf came out in 2020. And so it's a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, a contemporary retelling. And the main character is a boy instead of a girl. Frederico is going to go visit his grandfather instead of his grandmother. So it is and it is a trickster tale of him outwitting a wolf instead. And so it's just a great different perspective on Little Red Riding Hood. Little Rojo Riding Hood is another Latinx retelling of the traditional Little Red Riding Hood, and just would provide another perspective. I included here La Princesa and the Pea, and Maria Had a Little Llama. It's the example of just two other books that are retellings of Latinx folktales. The Basi Gaito is a folktale that's retold by Lucia Gonzalez. She's actually the current president or incoming president of the Association for Library Service to Children. She's a former president of Reforma, a librarian, but she's also an author as well. And so this story is about a rooster who's going to go to a wedding. It's a cumulative tale. The rooster thinks he's all great and wonderful and beautiful, but he gets dirty on the way to the wedding. And so it's all the drama that ensues after that. It provides a great opportunity for doing storytelling, telling on felt boards. And I've got actually an example later today of a felt board that you can do the Basi Gaito. I have librarian Katie Shearer has a video of her telling the Basi Gaito with the felt board. The Rooster Who Would Not Be Quiet. I threw this here because it is kind of a folk tale. It's a more modern folk tale. It's by Carmen Agrediti, the storyteller. And it's all about finding your voice and all about standing up for what you think is right, and can be a really great way to encourage a conversation with kids about when you see something, say something. Don't just be a bystander. And so in this story, it's about a town where the mayor didn't like noise, and he didn't like the rooster because the rooster made too much noise. And so everyone else was quiet, but the rooster refused to be quiet. The rooster found his voice and used his voice to kind of change the neighborhood. We're going to talk, I think in the next slides about communicating across languages when you don't speak a language. Well, Senior Pancho Had a Rancho is very similar to Old MacDonald Had a Farm, but the animals on this farm don't speak the same language. So it's about how they learn to cross communicate and how they learn to speak each other's languages just a little bit. So I like it because it's kind of a twist on Old MacDonald Had a Farm, which is something we all use all the time, or do something with farms and story time. So this is just another way to kind of change that up. It's written by Renee Colata-Lanez, who is a first grade teacher who writes a lot of great books for kids about the Latinx culture. Talking about celebrating Latinx culture, why not celebrate the lives of Latinx librarians? There are several wonderful books out there that celebrate the lives of Latinx librarians. The one on the far left, Digging for Words, is about a librarian in Colombia and the library that he built. This one came out in 2020. Waiting for the Biblioburo is a little bit older book, but it's a book about the teacher librarian in Colombia who travels throughout Colombia on his donkeys, Alpha and Beta, delivering books to kids throughout the rural areas. Planting Stories is about the life of Puerto Rican librarian Pura Bel Prey. And there is a new book about Pura Bel Prey, Pura's Cuentos, that is coming out in fall 2021. So you might want to keep your eye out for that one. And Schaumburg is also a story about a Afro-Puerto Rican who created the Schaumburg Library and the work that he did. So I encourage you to check that out as well. So moving from librarians, let's go to the power of stories to transport kids. Let's look at some Latinx fantasy. So C.C. Rios and the Desert of Souls is a great book for tweens. In this book, C.C. has a problem. Her sister Juana has been kidnapped by evil spirits that surround the town. The only way to save her is to become a bruja. Now, brujas have power that can control the spirits, but unfortunately, being a bruja is illegal. And Cece's family is not supportive of her engaging in criminal activity to save her sister. The story is really great for kids who love stories about quests. Definitely, for kids who like the Percy Jackson books or the other books by Rick Riordan, they'll like C.C. Rios. And again, that's coming out on April 21. Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez is a great book that I kind of think about when I read C.C. Rios. The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, as you can see here, it's an award-winning book. It's about Nestor and his mother. They recently moved to a new city after his dad has been deployed. The new town seems nice enough, but unfortunately all the animals are disappearing. And everyone thinks that his abuela is a witch that is taking the animals. Well, Nestor uses his ability to speak to animals to fight the real witch who is taking the animals before it is too late. Another great story about magic is the way to Rio Luna. In this story, Danny and his sister Pile, they believe in magic, all types of magic, including all the magic in books. They believe in the power of stories, and particularly in the magic land called Rio Luna. When they are placed in separate foster homes, Pile goes missing. And everyone's pretty sure she's just a teen runaway. But Danny knows that she escaped to Rio Luna and is waiting there for her. So with the help of a magic library book, I mean, who doesn't love magic library books? Danny travels from the US to South America in search of his sister. The question is, will he find her? Sal and Gabby break the universe. That's another, you can say it's part of the Rick Riordan series. That's enough said right there. Enough to grab the kids. The same kids that will like these books will enjoy that, or Charlie Hernandez and League of Shadows, or The Smoking Mirror. Manana Land is created by Pam Munoz Ryan. We all know the work of Pam Munoz Ryan. In this book, this story is also about the power of story and about missing persons like Rio Luna. It is an allegory for the current migrations situation here in the United States, US. In this story, readers meet Max. He's a boy who loves soccer and his grandfather's stories, but he misses his mother who disappeared when he was very young. So when he discovers that his family is part of a group of secret guardians that help people pass from place to place, Max decides he needs to go and find his mom. So he goes on a quest. They both die at the end. I get through this in an example of a teen book that's fantasy. Adam Silvera has written several teen books. Almost all of them have some type of fantasy element to them. In this particular book, it's an alternative world where everyone is going to die, just like now. We're all going to die. But instead of it just being completely unknown, you're actually going to get a text the day of the morning that you're going to die, telling you that you're going to die. And basically, this story is about two teens who get the text that tells them that they're going to die, and about them them connecting with each other and spending their last day together. It includes gay Latinx teens. It is great for fantasy fans, great even for sci-fi fans as well. I mentioned earlier communicating across languages. So here are a few recommendations for those types of books. We Laugh Alike. This is a brand new book, comes out in April of 21. It's a story that, as it says here, part English, part Spanish, and a whole lot of fun. So it's about these kids that are at the playground. 3 of them speak English, 3 of them speak Spanish. They want to play together. They're having trouble communicating, but eventually they learn enough of each other's language to play with each other at the playground. And I really like this as a book that the English and Spanish texts flow very nicely. There are no translations of the Spanish in the story because they're inferred, and you infer them as you go on through the story. So I really appreciate that you're learning the Spanish as you're reading the story versus it just being the text in English being repeated in the text in Spanish. Other books about learning to speak across languages or connecting across borders with languages. Mango, Abuelo, and Me, and Playing Loteria. Playing Loteria is a little older title, but both of those books are about kids connecting with their grandmothers, kids that have trouble connecting because of language barriers. In one, where they're connecting with the game Loteria, and the other one, they're connecting with a parrot who helps bridge that gap. Dear Primo is by Duncan Tono Tew, and it's about 2 cousins that are learning about the ways their culture in the US and the culture in Mexico is the same, but different. And so they're writing letters back and forth to each other. Lots of stories exist in Latinx literature about biculturalism. And so these are a few stories here about biculturalism, but then also about names and finding home. So Alma and how she got her name, it was a Caldecott Award winning for illustrations. It's about a girl that has several Spanish surnames. And so it's going through the different Spanish surnames, and she's talking about the importance of those names. It's a great book to pair with the older book called Renee Has Two Last Names, which is a child who immigrates from El Salvador to the United States. And he has two last names where his classmates only have one. Both of those books are similar to the early chapter book, My Name is Maria Isabel, which is a very oldie but goodie book created by Alma Ferrada about a child who has multiple last names, and she has to convince her teacher to, the importance of using both of those names. The other picture book's on the right. Where Are You From? That's a picture book about a kid she's bicultural, and she's trying to explain to classmates about where she comes from. But it also kind of explores why you shouldn't ask people where they're from and how inappropriate that is. Island Born is a book about just being proud of your cultural heritage and where you come from, and how you can connect to home through art. Two other books about being bicultural. Marisol McDonald Doesn't Match. It's a girl who is Peruvian and Scottish, and so provides a different look on what a Latinx child might appear to look like, and also has great melding of Peruvian and American culture in the illustrations. Tooth Fairy Meets El Raton Perez. It's a great book for read aloud or for story time, and it's about the Tooth Fairy coming to collect the tooth of a child who is Mexican American. Unfortunately, El Raton Perez is also there, because in some places in Mexico, El Raton Perez is the one who goes to collect the teeth. So they battle to the end to decide who gets to have his teeth, and they find out in the end that the best way to get teeth is through working together, through partnering. Don't Ask Me Where I'm From is perfect for the fans of The Hate You Give and Under the Mesquite. It is a contemporary YA book that follows Liliana. She's a first-generation Latinx American teen. It follows her as she's navigating the blurred lines between her all-white school, the widespread racism in her community, and her home life, where there are lots of dark secrets, such as the fact that her dad is a deportee. The novel is all about finding yourself and learning what you stand for. So it kind of goes into this whole idea of biculturalism, of home, and of just navigating home and school life, which kind of fits into this whole overall category. Some other books recommendations about the power of poetry and the power of believing in yourself. Here are some books on the far left about that. Two of the books that I'll recommend. First Rule of Punk is about 12-year-old Maria Luisa O'Neill Morales, or Mali. She is not thrilled when she and her mother have to move from Gainesville, Florida to Chicago. But the plucky 7th grader does not let this bother her or her mother's dismay about her punk band get her down. She has a lot of school problems. She is not proud of her Latinx heritage, but throughout the book, through her love of zines, through her love of punk music, she eventually learns about Latinx punk artists, and she learns to appreciate her Latinx culture. Poet X is a powerful YA novel. I'm sure you already know about this book. It's written in verse, and it's about a girl who is a teen girl who's navigating her life, trying to figure out where she fits in the world. She has a estranged relationship with her mother, who cares for her, but has very clear views of what's right for girls and what's right for boys. And so it's all about the main character finding her voice and finding her place in the world. And I've got an activity later on that I recommend that you can do with teens with the Poet X. For moving stories, I got some other books here that I recommend if moving is something that many kids can relate to. So 1,000 White Butterflies is a book that came out in 2021. It's about a child who moves to the US from a Latin American country. She's never seen snow before, so it's about her experiencing her first snow, but then also tying it to things back at home. A New Kind of Wild and Coquille in the City are both books about boys that have left Puerto Rico and they're going to a new place. And it's about navigating the experience of leaving your home, you're leaving your island and going to a place that might seem cold and unwelcoming, and finding your place in that. Both of them have really beautiful illustrations. And then far right by Meg Medina, Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away. It's just a great moving story about these two girls that have a close friendship, and them learning how that they're still connect with each other even after they're not living in the same place. Some recommendations for LGBTQ plus Latinx stories. So some of these are new books. Some of these are a little bit older. Juliet Takes a Breath. This is, a graphic novel version of the traditional novel that written by Gabby Rivera. It follows a lesbian teen. The original version was highly successful. The graphic novel version can reach another whole level of teens and visual learners as well. The book to the left of that is another graphic novel, You Brought Me the Ocean. It's about a gay teen with superhero powers. So if you have kids that or teens that are interested in superheroes, this is your opportunity to read a superhero story about a Latinx superhero who is also gay. And speaking of superheroes, the greatest superhero or superpower is by Alex Sanchez. It's a book coming out in 2021, and it is about a racial bicultural teen who has a trans father. So it explores what it's like to have a trans father within the Latinx community. The Moon Within, on the far right, is a story about a gender fluid tween. It's also about who the gender fluid tween is the friend of the main character. The main character, this book is kind of described as the updated version of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So it's just about a girl, finding her way into womanhood through her, as her body is changing, but then also thinking about her own personal beliefs and who she can connect to and what is right and what is wrong. 3 books at the bottom are all picture books. The far left, When We Love Someone, We Sing to Them. It's about a gay child who's talking to a family member about what it feels like to be in love with another boy. Julian is a Mermaid. I'm sure you all know this book. It's about a boy named Julian who sees some mermaids going on their way to a mermaid parade. And so he decides that he would like to be like them. Actually, I'm sorry, he sees drag queens. And he decides that he sees them and thinks that they look like mermaids. And so he decides that he wants to be like them. And so he dresses up with them using some of his grandmother's or his abuela's clothing. And he's afraid that when she finds him dressing up, that she'll, scold him and he'll be embarrassed. Instead, his grandmother is super supportive, and she takes him to the Coney Island Mermaid Parade. So it's a book about celebrating diversity, celebrating your gender, celebrating just being a gender diverse kid and who you are. Another book kind of similar to that, One of a Kind Like Me, is a bilingual book about a kid who wants to dress up for Halloween, wants to dress up as a princess. And the Latinx kid wants to dress up as a princess. And so it's about his mother going through a thrift store and helping him find the perfect costume for that. A few other books. I've mentioned a lot of picture books. I've written a lot of novels, nonfiction. So here are a few early chapter books. Now, these are all chapter books I call Girl Power. So Lily Levine, all these is part of a series. The first one in the series, Stella Diaz, I think that's the third one in the series. These are all series books, early chapter series books. So for your kids who like Judy Moody or Judy B. Jones or that kind of whole set of early chapter books with powerful, strong females. These are all books that have strong Latinx or Latina main characters. The book on the far right, She Persisted series. So this is first came out as a nonfiction picture book. And so now what they're doing for this series is they're having individual early chapter books that focus on famous women throughout US history. And so in fall 2021, Meg Medina has the early chapter book coming out about Sonia Sotomayor. And so be on the lookout for that if you're looking for an early chapter biography with a famous Latinx American. All right, so I've talked about a lot of books that are out there, and I know I've thrown a lot at you. They're all on your handouts. You can go and check them out. There's a lot more great books, again, than the ones I mentioned. So I encourage you to check out some of the other resources that I've mentioned, some of the websites for finding more books and the review blogs for teen books or for kids books. But I want to talk a little bit about using Latinx kids books and teen books in the library. So How do you integrate all these wonderful books into your library program? First of all, think about, you don't have to wait till Hispanic Heritage Month. You can incorporate these books into weekly story times on similar topics, stories about family, about specific events in history, stories about cultural pride, story times about school life, school relations. There's lots of opportunities to include these stories in your regular story time programs. You can also do read-alike discussions where you pair Latinx kids or YA books, novels, with similar titles about other cultural books and cultural groups. So again, it's an opportunity. So you can have like a Latinx fantasy book that you pair with an Asian American fantasy book. The Rick Riordan series presents series provides lots of great opportunities and fodder for that. But you can do that with any topic that you choose. You might incorporate these books into your DIA programming, and we'll talk a little bit more about what DIA is. And you can also include it in your summer reading program. So just any type of program that you do, just be purposeful and intentional about including Latinx, YA books, and kids books in your displays and your programs and things that you do. You can celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with an evening of stories or Noche de Cuentos event where you have intergenerational storytelling. And then you have book discussions groups, small group book discussions, or have kids create digital stories. So maybe after having all these Latinx families come together, do intergenerational stories, and have a digital storytelling event where teens maybe help their grandparents who have told stories, or the elders who have told stories, help them record those stories and then turn them into digital stories on the computer. Strongly encourage when you're sharing these books with teens and kids to do book talks that promote these titles using a centering versus an othering lens. Now, what do I mean by that? So oftentimes as librarians, we use an othering lens when we book talk a story. We say, this is a great book. It's a book about a Mexican-American kid whose mother had disappeared. And so he's going to, and then you go on to the rest of the story. Well, the problem is, if you start telling that story, if you have a kid who is not Mexican-American, they're probably not even going to stop. They're going to stop listening right there. They're like, well, it has nothing to do with me. I'm not Mexican-American. If you pitch that story differently and you talk about that this is an adventure story, it's a story about missing persons, it's a story about a kid who loves soccer, it's a story about loving stories of your grandparents, and it's a story about finding your mother with the help of some magic, then that's a story that might attract a larger group of kids. Now, the kids who read that story will still read Mañana Land. They'll still encounter characters that might come from a specific Latinx cultural group, but they'll have an opportunity to read the story. They'll check out and they'll find the story. If you started out and just saying it's by someone from about X cultural group, then you're automatically putting up a roadblock right there, and kids are not going to want to proceed if it doesn't relate to their cultural group. So if you do a centering talk about the action in the story, then kids have an opportunity to engage and encounter diverse characters when they just find a good book. So I encourage you to think about that when you are promoting your books. So displays are a great way to promote Latinx Kids Lit. This is an example of a fantastic display for Banned Books Week that I found on Pinterest. So this was a librarian who was celebrating Banned Books Week. They created a bulletin board celebrating Lucha Libre, and it says, "Fight for your right to read." And so they have all various books that have been challenged on the display, and you can see the Lucha Libre masks and above each of those for all the readers that are reading these banned books. So I just love the idea of this, and thought it was a great way to kind of bring in a bit of Latinx culture into other areas of the library. So just use that as inspiration to think kind of out of the box. What are some things that you could do to promote Latinx culture through your displays? And think of 3D displays that will really get the attention of your kids and your teens. I mentioned earlier the Base Gaito. So Katie Shearer, she is a consultant who presents a lot on bilingual story times. She and I wrote the book Once Upon a Quinto, Bilingual Story Times in English and Spanish. She worked with the Library of Virginia to record a series of training videos on bilingual storytelling with props. And so you can see some examples of those there, and I've got some more information on your handout about how to find some of her other videos. So it's a really great way to see someone actually practicing how to do bilingual storytelling with props. All right, as I promised, here's an example of what you can do with the Poet X as a way to snag teens. You can also do something with First Rule of Punk as a way to get tweens interested, or even young teens interested in some original programming. So when you have kids or teens create a playlist or a character reading list or create zines, it can be a really great way to kind of go beyond the book and have kids make a great connection. So kids can create a playlist that goes along with the book, either emotions of the character in the book or songs that that character might have listened to during points and various points in the book. As a way to kind of explore more about that character, think about their thought processes, etc. So here at the top, I give an example. There's the Poet X. And if you look on Spotify, somebody already created a playlist that goes along with the Poet X. But what you could do is you could have your teens come up with, pick any other Latinx teen book they want or tween book that they want, and come up with a playlist of what are some songs that the main character would listen to. And so it really requires the kids to think critically about the characters that are in the book and what kind of music they would listen to. And it's a great way to explore different types of music and also have fun along the way. Similar to that, you could also have teens and tweens create a reading list. So what are some books that the main character might have read, or what are some things that they might be interested in? So like, for example, the First Rule of Punk, she became very interested in punk music and the Latinx punk rockers. So biographies, maybe she would read some biographies about specific Latinx punk rockers, or maybe she read some informational books about punk rock. Then she became very engaged in learning more about her cultural roots. So maybe she would read some nonfiction books or some novels about characters that represented her cultural roots. You could also have teens or tweens create zines. So like in First Rule of Punk, the main character, Naidoo, created lots of zines to kind of understand her world. So the author of that, Celia Perez, who is also a kick-butt librarian, has something on Read Brightly that shows you how to make zines. And that can be a great thing to pair with the First Rule of Punk. Celia Perez also has on her own website a playlist that goes along with the First Rule of Punk. Has a lot of punk songs in there. Also in the story, Celia Perez is listening to the main character, Naidoo, is listening to some records. And so Celia Perez on her playlist has included some of the older classical music that the main character was listening to as well. So there's lots of great opportunities there to do something with music or with zines or with reading lists, character reading lists, to kind of go beyond the book. All right, a few other recommendations. Kohler in Colorado has a lot of great stuff on their website about connecting with AEL learners. There's some videos on there with Latinx authors and illustrators talking about their work. Cuentos and Más, Cuentos and More is a program that was created by Arlington TV in Virginia many years ago, but their videos are still online. It's kind of like a bilingual Reading Rainbow or Sesame Street, and it was produced by a library. And it's a great way to kind of see how you can do some programming, bilingual programming, including Latinx stories, along with Latinx folk rhymes and songs and music and all kinds of hands-on stuff. So I encourage you to check that out. Children's Day Book Day was created by Pat Mora. I'm sure many of you have already celebrated Children's Day Book Day. This is a way to celebrate the power of books, the power of culture, the power of words. When DIA was first created, it was all about celebrating Latinx culture. Now has morphed and developed into celebrating all types of cultural diversity. Pat Moore really promotes the idea of doing things to celebrate cultural diversity through DIA every day, through all of your programming that you do in the library, and then having a big culminating event on April 30th. There's a lot of great materials available for planning DIA events. So the official DIA website on ALA, diala.org, has a lot of great promotion materials and a planning guide. Pat Mora also has a very extensive planning guide that goes along on her website for planning a DIA event. Lots of step-by-step instructions on what to do. There's a lot of great other resources for planning DIA. Noche de Cuentos, I mentioned that earlier. That's an evening of stories. This was created by Reforma in 2010. And There's a lot of great information on their website about how to connect with storytelling, Latinx storytelling. And every year or every other year, Reforma also gives out Noche de Cuento planning grants to help libraries create their own Noche de Cuento programs, which celebrate intergenerational storytelling. So I encourage you to go check that out. And speaking of checking out, there's a lot more great information on your handout. So please go and check out your handouts to find more resources for programming, more sources for information. And finally, speaking of more information, I highly encourage you to go and to check out Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Just in December of 2020, this was an online festival celebrating Latinx kids' books. So I encourage you to go check that out. A lot of great resources there, and lots more to come. Finally, last but not least, here is my contact information. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to answer them. So thank you very much and have a great day.